I recently made an interactive maths book for my 2-year-old son for him to play with whenever we took him to the church. I saw the idea on Etsy, somebody had made, and I decided to have a go at doing it myself. These are the sketches that I used, what pages I was going to do, and which order I was going to do them in whenever I was planning what way to do it. I used square pieces of felt for most of the pages. As I was doing it, I thought of other things that I wanted to have the sequence of the mass through it, really. So some of the pages got swapped around, as you can see, with arrows. I changed page numbers, and some ideas that I had I just took out altogether or changed as I was putting it together. I've used cable ties for now. I'm just going to pop up in the corner of the screen. What I'm planning to put on it, like ring binder type things, you can get them online. I've made it with felt. I used my sewing machine to stitch the first one, just kind of about half a centimetre all the way around. And what I did was I made each page individually and then put them together. The first few I put together and did like this, but then my son he kept thinking he could open it by doing this here, and then got annoyed because he couldn't get it opened. So after I did the first few and then he had played with them, I realised I needed to do something a little bit more. So this one I zigzagged around the edges because the fabric I used for the backing on this one was a frayable fabric, whereas the others were felt. So I had to stitch it onto the felt as opposed to stitch two felt pieces together, which is what the others are. So when I got this far through, then I'd realised that I needed to stitch right to the edge. So I zigzag stitched all the way around. Now, if you don't have a sewing machine, you could just use glue. But I zigzagged these all the way around. Okay, so each page then, how I constructed those. First of all, I used a sewing machine to stick on all my bits and pieces. The letters I just drew out with a pen onto the felt and then cut them out. Basically, I used lots of different colours for the front cover. Then I just ran a single stitch line of stitching over them. If you don't have a sewing machine to do this, you can do it by hand, or you can just use PVA glue. The only thing is, if you use PVA glue, you'll not be able to wash it. My second page then was the doors. So I used actually an offcut from a blind that was cut down to size. I just thought this was a good colour for the outside of the church. I stitched using my sewing machine, stitched around just random sized bricks, just to make it look a little bit more like the outside of the church. I cut two shapes of felt. I did do a little bit of hand stitching on it just to kind of show the panels on the doors. What I plan to do is put little buttons on it to show handles, but I haven't done that yet. In behind that, I cut out of paper a template for the arch. So what I did was I folded the paper in half. I'll just show it to you up in the corner of the screen here in a moment. I folded the page in half and then cut out half a church shape so that it was symmetrical. Then I put it on top of the grey fabric and then cut it out from that. I used a coloured fabric in behind that. So it's attached to the grey fabric before I put the other thing, before I attach the two pages together. So it's attached to the grey fabric by this stitching around the outside and a little line of stitching at the very bottom there. And then I stitched the altar out of a bit of felt and the tabernacle, and again I just stitched onto those there, but you could draw that on, the crosses onto it. I used little tiny snippets of ribbon that came from the inside of a top, you know, the little bits of ribbon that hold a top onto a hanger. And I used a little bit of gold embroidery thread, but you could use a bead or just a little bit of yellow paint or whatever on that, or a bit of yellow ribbon for the flames. I just cut a little hole through the fabric. Felt is great because it doesn't fray, so you don't have to finish the edges on the felt, which is why I used it for a lot of the construction. The sanctuary lamp, I just used a bit of cord that came off a gift bag, and I just zigzag stitched that all the way along. Again, you could just glue it on, or you could stitch it by hand, whichever your preference is, or you could just use yellow felt or whatever else you happen to have. And I used a bit of felt then for the sanctuary lamp. Now I happen to have a little scrap of glittery red that I'd had for a Christmas project, so I used that just because it was supposed to be a sanctuary lamp. But what I had originally intended, which you could see in the sketch, is that to put a little bead in the middle to represent the flame of the candle. This page was the most time consuming. I don't think I'd bother doing it again the way I did. I don't know how you would make it any easier though. I wanted to represent the congregation like in the original book that I had seen. So I drew a template of a whole person, and then I cut out a template for a jumper, a template for trousers, which is exactly the same as the skirt, only there's no legs cut out of it. A template for shoes, and a template for the head and hands. And then I just cut them out of different colours of felt. These two are cut out of an old pair of jeans. But the thing about those is you have to finish off the edges, so I had to zigzag stitch over that. And this one's cut out of that blind fabric again that I'd used before. I used brown felt for the bench first, and then I stuck all the people on after that. I just hand drew their faces on. Not brilliant looking, but for a 2-year-old, he probably enjoys it. And I just zigzag. I just tried to make each top look a little bit different somehow, and the trousers look a little bit different. I just used a permanent marker to draw a belt onto these grey trousers here. Then we have the priest. Now he is made as this here with just the alb, the white alb underneath, and I put a little bit of Velcro onto the front of the alb. I also have Velcro on the back of the chasuble, and in order to do that I ran stitching down the front which holds the Velcro in place, but makes it look a bit decorative, as some priest vestments have this anyway. And the great thing is I didn't sew all the way around this one, so I could make a pocket so that I can have interchangeable vestments for the priest depending on the season. I thought that would be a nice interactive way for children to something for them to look out for. What colour is the priest wearing today? And then they can put the right colour on the priest and keep the spare colours on the inside. So at the moment I only have a green and a purple, but I'm planning to make a white one and a red one and a pink one. I did use some embroidery thread to stitch on the hair and little beads for the eyes, and stitched on the faces on this one because I wasn't so happy with the faces here. Just with just a normal thread. Those were done, but I did use embroidery thread for the hair, but you could use whatever you have lying around to glue on as well. You can also get stick and stick Velcro, which would be fine, but I just thought the stitched Velcro is more secure. The same face and hair techniques used as the priest's one, and I've done the same on the next page as well. I just stitched around the body of this person because I wanted to keep the hands free, and then I just stitched a little tiny circle with a straight, kind of oval with a straight edge on it for the hands, so this person can bless themselves. My son absolutely loves this page, and he keeps doing the amen, putting the hands together. For a little extra, I just added a bit of ribbon through a hole, and I've tied a knot at the back of it to really secure that in place, and threaded on some beads that I happen to have that for card making, just so that there's something, again, a little bit more interactive there for him to fiddle with. The person here doing the reading, I stitched on just a couple of stitches to hold these on, but again, you could use a bit of felt for the microphone. I just cut out a half circle, a semicircle for the body, and a rectangle for this here, and stitched on a cross, but again, this can all be glued. I happen to have a scrap of leatherette, which I used for this, and just wrote this on with a permanent marker. And then on the other side that you can flip over, so I just stitched it here to attach it in place, and and then you can flip this over, and then we have the thanks be to God. I didn't have enough leatherette for this as well, so this is just a bit of kind of interlining that I'd used to make some face masks. Then we have the offertory. So for this, I've just done the grapes and some bread. I used buttons. I just went to the local haberdashery shop and bought a pack of purple buttons, just all random ones, and I stitched them on by hand. First of all, I had put just a little kind of stalk, cut out a leaf that was something a bit like a vine leaf, and stitched a line up the centre of it just to make it look a little bit more proper leaf shaped and leaf like. This is a scrap of an old cushion, and again I had to zigzag around the edges of that because it doesn't it would fray otherwise. And then I used a zigzag stitch to create the marks, the little cuts on the top of the loaf, but you could just use felt for this and felt for the little cuts on the top. For the consecration, I wanted it to be something elegant but simple, so I chose this, again, just a scrap that I had. I don't even know where I got this scrap from. I thought that was a nice background, and just a plain gold ribbon, and I just stitched it with a straight stitch down and a straight stitch across, and that was it. By the way, with the ribbons, I just use a little bit of a flame to seal the edges of the ribbons. If you just hold a flame fairly close to those, that will help you get those sealed so that they don't fray at the edges. That's a little tip for that. The hands then, I'm not brilliant at drawing hands, I discovered, but once I got this one, then that became the one that sat in the front. I didn't bother doing all the fingers for the one that was going to be in behind. And I just stitched around them, more detailed stitching than there was in the actual cutting, so that it looks like the hand is together like this here for shaking hands for the sign of peace. You can get dove shapes on the internet. I copied this by hand from the internet, but you could just print one off and trace it, and then I traced it onto the white felt and cut it out. Again, I've added a little bit more detail with the stitching than there is on the actual felt. And I'm thinking about if I can find some feathers, maybe stitching some feathers onto that as well. So the communion one I kept very simple, just a circle with a cross in the centre for the host and a yellow chalice shape. Again, I just folded a piece of paper over and drew half a chalice so that I got a symmetrical shape when I cut it out, and drew it onto the felt to cut that out then. I did run a little stitch of gold thread across just to add a little bit of decoration. I considered sticking on some sequins too, but then I just decided to keep it simple. Then for the last full page, I had a thanks be to God. I just wrote this in pen, in marker actually, onto the felt, and then just did a little stitch by hand all the way around it. With an embroidery thread, a little thicker thread, but you could use wool if you had a needle that would go through it. For the back cover, I made a stained glass window that could be seen through. So I actually used a laminating sheet, drew with permanent marker, drew some random lines, and then coloured it in, and then ran it through a laminating machine. What I had originally thought of was using a bit of packaging from some sheets, the kind of heavier packaging that you get with sheets, so it was just a little bit more robust. You could use a poly pocket or something as well if you wanted to make this, but it just takes something just a little bit stronger. Then I cut out the same as in the front. I just reused the template that I had used for the door at the front of the book. I reused that for the back here. Again, I used that bit of lined fabric, and I cut out the same shape then from the two and stitched around the edges of the window to hold the stained glass part in place. So that is the entire book. Of course, anyone can do it whatever way they like. That is just the way I did it. But good luck if you're having a go at it.